Hello, and welcome to this short video. This video is being recorded for my post-colonial literature students in order to familiarize them with the poem Ode to Death by Daud Kamal. This is a very intriguing poem, but still it needs to have some discussion so that the students in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom may have a very good idea. This poem is definitely Ode to Death by Daud Kamal. This is really very fascinating poem. Let us enter into the poem to see whether the fascination of the poem and the complexity of the poem does exist in order to make it even more intriguing, helpful, and understanding for the people. Before we go to the poem, let me say something about this poem. This poem is the part of post colonial literature, and do people, my audience and students, know very well that post colonial literature is the literature produced mostly by the people, writers, authors who are living in the formerly colonized countries or are belonging to this country. And when they produce literature, it has got certain, philosophies, indications, and the other things which are, you're showing that it's a post-colonial literature. The biggest, issue with the post-colonial literature is that it reveals the conflicts. It talks about the things in the language which is not the language of the areas from where it is coming, and lots of genre and the other things are followed uh, by the postcolonial writers, and however they have their own ways of expressing themselves. So when a literature is produced in English language and it goes to express and talk and discuss about the matters pertaining to not necessarily to the English people, but mostly to the people who are living in the formerly colonized countries. At that time, it becomes post-colonial literature. So, therefore, the poem that we are going to discuss is here, and that poem is Ode to Death by Daud Kamal. This poem shows, lots of things to us, and its title is something which is really fascinating: Ode to Death. I mean, there is a person who should admire or praise something which is horrible most of the time. I have been reading many poets. Some of the poets have welcomed death and some have not welcomed it. But this is really significant that why the poet are of the habit to welcome death. There is one poet, Robert Browning, who most of the time would like to mention death in his poetry. And for example, one of the poem, it is just about death. He talks about that he welcomes death and wants to say a very warm welcome to death because he believes that in that way he will be better off in this world. Same is the case with the poem Rubai Ben Ezra. In that poem, too, Browning talks about the player of death, that when he would die at that time, he would be able to meet God. So there are different ways in order to approach the matter of death. But there is another way as well, which was pointed out by Francis Bacon in his essay of death. There he has discussed all the parts of all the aspects of death, but one of them was that we have made it very very fearful, and so most of the pain that happens to us at the time of death, the pain to the person who's dying and the pain to the people who are around that person, and that is, according to Francis Bacon, mostly because of the fear that we have created. So there have been lots of versions of death. We need to see in this poem what is the version that this poem goes to offer to us. First of all, let us enter into the poem. Let's enter and see into the poem what the things possibly can be there. For example, first of all, it is the author Daud Kamal. It's very simple to talk about him. For example, he's a Pakistani poet. He was born in 1937 and then he died in 1987. He is a good academician. I mean, he has been delivering good lectures to the people, and there's a Pakistani poet. That's right. And then he was from the city Peshawar. He was born on in January 4 in Abbottabad, studied in Burnhall, that was the Cambridge school, ultimately reached Srinagar, Kashmir, and became the professor of English literature at the University of Bihar. His poems were recorded for the Library of Congress in the United States. This is the highest honor he was claiming. Then Kamal's poetry has got local themes as well as religious imagery. Like the It talks about not only the monasteries but also talks about the Hindu temples and then kingfishers. Daud Kamal had won many laurels in his life. For example, certificates of recognition from the International Poetry Competition in the US, the Faz Award in 1987, and a posthumous Pride of Performance Award in 1990. Lots of celebrations, lots of recognitions fall in the share of this poet. Daud Kamal died, left us alone in this world in 1987. So this is the brief introduction of the poet, and definitely the Pakistani poet. And the biography goes to show that he was a well-read, educated, literally very much advanced, and had seen the foreign world as well. So there will be a kind of mixture of the local cultural reflection as well as the experiences which Daud Kamal has been making in different parts of the world. And his natural talent, of course, will come forward in order to make us even more understand what the poet says and what he wants to say. So, in this way, there are many good things that he talks in his poetry. Let's enter into the poem and let's see. I have divided this poem into different parts, though it's a continuous poem, but for the sake of understanding or for the sake of understanding by the students and by other people, I have divided the poem into different parts, and hopefully the people will be enjoying different parts because these are short and brief, and as a result, it will be possible for you to see. See, the first one is going to be death is more than certain, says E. E. Cummings, but the clock go on ticking as before, and in every particle of carbon dust there lives a diamond dream. How many galaxies yet to be explored, how many seeds in the pomegranate of time. So here the start of the poem is made by some quote or some reference which E. Cumming gave to the poetry and to death in order to correlate it with the death, so that scene that Kamal goes to talk about. He says that death is more than certain, that it's something which definitely comes. Nobody can avoid it, nobody can save himself from that. Whatever is born is to die as well. And but the life goes on. One dies, but the life goes on. And this thing he reveals to the clicking of the clock, and then he talks about the discoveries which are made by the people. Many diamond dreams there were the people wanted to fulfill, and many explorations are to be made in the galaxies of the stars, and still many pomegranates are to be opened and found with their seeds and are to be enjoyed. So this is the way what life presents, and then life itself ends. For example, when we are alive, we are there to see what time is there and what time is going on and what time is finished. Again, we also have many dreams which are beautiful dreams, and these dreams can be of shining diamonds, can be of anything. But then we also think of exploring number of things like the galaxies, and then we enjoy the seeds of the fruit like pomegranate. So all these things we continue to do. These are finishing at certain point, in the same way as life would finish at certain point. But life goes on as well. So in this way, by using the symbols of the clock and that of carbon dust and ultimately that of the galaxies and pomegranate seeds, or the poet wants to say that life is beautiful as well as enjoyable as these things are. Life fulfills our dreams and wishes also, but then it can finish also, it can have some impact on ourselves as well. Life has to end, death has to come, that is the surety. But the things are there which exist in the shape of life, and they die, they finish too, but life goes on. So, in this way, human beings are the people who are to live with the certainty of death to come. Nobody can avoid, nobody can save himself from that. It's impending, it's certain, it definitely comes there. And now let's enter into the second part of the poem that I divided myself. It's here. It says, the pine tree blasted by last year's thunderbolt and the burn-out matchstick in my ashtray look so terribly alike. First, these three lines, if you see that, there is kind of alienation or similarity traced by the poet. One is that of the burning tops of the trees because of the thunderbolt, and then is the burning top of a match, when it is in the ashtray, it's burning. The poet says that both are alike. This is very fascinating image because life also burns the same way. Life walks on, goes on, and ultimately consumes itself. It finishes. And the shape of ending moment of life in the time of death would be just like the smashed, burnt out pine trees tops, as Milton would point out in his Paradise Lost, in order to show us the face of Satan, that his face was just like the burnt tops of the trees, pine trees, when thunderbolt falls on them. And then it has been compared to the matchbox, which burns itself in order to burn something ultimately, and quickly it goes away. So life is like that. It is shining sometime, and after that, it disappears or it is burned. It is consuming itself, and very soon it consumes itself. And then, next lines, I have sat by your bedside and felt your sinking pulse. In the same way as the match from the matchbox burns itself slowly, gradually, and finishes in the same way human life ends, the poet says that he's been experiencing the sinking pulse of the friend or the companion who was in the bedside, present there, and was understanding what is happening with the person, that the life is going away. The indication was sinking of the pulse. Are the hair and the bones really indestructible, and how long does it take for the eyes to dissolve in the grave? These lines are very philosophic because even if we say that death comes, life is mortal, and everything would finish, but still there are certain things attached with the human life. For example, the bones, and then is the hair, the eye socket, the eyeballs, for example. These things take a longer time in finishing before the body, other body parts of the human being finish. Uh, the eye, for example, can keep on shining for a very long time if it is in the sea, as was pointed out by T.S. Eliot in his poem Wasteland, that the eye of the merchant could be found in the sea. It could exist for a very long time. Same is the case with the bones until they become brittle and are turned into powder, but the hair of the human being lasts very long. So a part of human being keeps on lasting in this world for a very long time. The poet tries to understand how long would it take the hair to dissolve itself. There are certain things which are indestructible in the grave, but ultimately they also are destroyed. So life is to finish. The indications of the life would exist for some time, and ultimately it would finish as well. This is the uh, this is the kind of explanation the poet is trying to give to the readers, that everything is to finish, but some things take more time in finishing, and some things dry out, finish up very early. And let's see what happens in part three. In part three, the same theory, same kind of thing goes on. The poet because says here that two streams mingle in forgotten river. Between the eye and the tear, there is the archipelago of naked rocks, only sleep and silence there, no anchorage for grief. The tear, for example, comes out of the eye, and the shape of the tear, and how does it fall down, and how does it exist, that the poet is comparing with the archipelago of the naked rocks. He says that tears come at that time when sleep and silence is there. Nobody, even if weep or cry, the tears can come there. If somebody doesn't describe, even if the grief is there, the tear would come. The grief is sometime inside. At that time, the grief cannot show itself other than the tears would come out. The tears coming out and the eye has been compared by the poet not only with archipelago but also with the stream, the two streams of the forgotten river. That as the two streams mingle up and make up one river, in the same way eye and the tear mingle up in order to make it a river. So weeping of a person, the tears of a person bring out the kind of river inside him, the kind of problem and the grief inside him, though he doesn't want to express it, but still it is being expressed through the tear. And then it is something with the poet says at the lines, I to have wandered in a forest of symbols and clutched at the hearts of memory. He says that there have been many memories in his mind, and he has been wandering here and there in order to understand what life is going to be. But the images and the symbols, the memories were so much that he was unable to decide. He was simply wandering about there. He was unable to understand the mystery of life. He was unable to understand the mystery of death. But still, he keeps on finding the mystery, trying to see what it is and how it is. That's why the poet is saying that he's still wandering about. Part 4 of the poem is even more intriguing because here death is playing its role. For example, the poet says, I have seen the stars pilumate to their dark addresses. I have felt your absence around my neck, but let bygones be bygone. Who was the deceiver and who the deceived? Was I on a floating island? And were you on the shore? Which one of us moved away? So, poet concocts his other half by saying that he and his other half were present there and in the life, and they wanted to see who goes first, but then it was difficult to understand what is going on. For example, he says that in the darkness, stars were permitting, and he was feeling the absence of the presence of someone. But he says immediately that let bygones be bygone, and trying to understand who he is and what is his other part. So therefore, a poet becomes two in one, and that two, and ultimately becomes one out of two, or one explodes into, or creates into, or divides into two. And he tries to understand himself by looking at himself by saying that there was a floating island. On it was difficult, however, to understand who was there, who was on the shore, and who was there still making his way to reach the shore. So that thing also is very philosophic because when death comes at that time, somebody misses, somebody disappears. But then he says that some part of that person stays on in the memory. And that memory keeps on making us realize that the person is still with us. So it's not clear who has died, whether the person is inside our mind has died, or the person who is physically or has been physically present with us, that person has died. This mystery makes us feel good for some time, and possibly we don't feel that bad, or we don't feel that if this is the situation. So death is playing its role, but the poet says that death can be in this way as well. And then definitely some of the themes of the poem are there, like themes of decay and decline. Well, everything which is barred in this world gets birth in this world. On the earth, that person, that thing is to go under decay, and ultimately it has to finish. The life of human being and other objects is the best example of that. Pope, Alexander Pope, in his poem Rape of the Lock, says that the steel or the fights and the quarrels and other things kill the human being and things. But time is something which finishes everything. He gives the example, Ozymandias, for example, by Shelley, gives the example of the death of the statue of a king because of time. So time destroys everything. Same as the case here, the death ultimately, decay ultimately has to come, and it finishes us, it finishes everything. Everything finishes with the passage of time. So, Ode to Death tells us the secrets of life and death as well. And the third theme is fragility of life and temporality. The poet is trying to say that life is very short, life is very weak, it can finish as well. It is not permanent at all. The permanence is to the non life, not to the life, because death will continue to exist, but the life of human being may not be existing. Materialism has increased in our life, definitely. It is playing a role. We are not careful what is happening around us. We are running our life behind this materialism. And so, in this way, we don't remember our life or don't remember our death even. So the poet is trying to point out that life and death both are important for us. But life is more important because death can come to us in any moment. So the things which are associated with life should be thoroughly and very well and completely enjoyed as well. Some of the critical matter, the poem is the ode. Ode is the poem which is written in the praise of something, and very strangely, this poem is a poem which is written in praise of death. Tone of the poem is sadder, is up to some extent disappointing as well, but it is underneath the cover. If it's read very deeply, the poem's tone becomes, up to some extent happy as well, encouraging and optimistic as well. The use of metaphors is there sometime the tree top burning, then the matchbox burning, then other things are talked about. Imagery has also been created by the poet as the archipelago, the tear. These type of things have a good imagery. By all these things, he tries to indicate to something which may be related to religiosity, and that religiosity makes the poetry of this poet as mysticism. The style of the poet is a little bit difficult in this poem. It's not that very easy as the other poems of Daud Kamal are. It's a little bit difficult and complex to understand, however, with a little bit of attention, it can be understood. So that was all about this poem. So we shall be reaching to our conclusive end. But before we end, let us talk about the understanding which has been developed out of this poem, or any of the good things which has come out of this lecture. Please do not fail to pinpoint, and so that it may help me in making my next coming lectures even better for you. But then, if you like it or you have understood something, there was a benefit out of that, then do not fail to click the subscribe button or and the like button and to say something good for its improvement in the comment section as well. So thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you soon in some next upcoming videos. Okay, that's it from my side, from this area of the world. Good night.